the Geo Bunker.
Hey guys, we're back at Geo Bunker. We have been suggested we need to social distance a bit more. The world is between us.
The world, we're worlds apart.
So, today's video is to introduce Year 11 to political geography. If you're keeping up, you should have already done definitions, looking at all of the different words for specific terms that we use in the political geography topic.
It's like reading the news. It feels like we're reading.
Except I feel really short again because my chair.
She keeps saying her chair's broken. It's not broken.
Is.
She's just not as tall as she thinks she is.
So what we're going to be looking at today is a number of terms that you need to know as part of political geography. So looking at the shift in the world from large empires to what we have now, which is nation states, and understanding this idea of sovereignty. Some students get really stuck on sovereignty and empires and nations. It's not that complex, it's just a word you need to get used to using and you need to practice using.
Yeah, anyone that also does legal studies by any chance, this is a word that comes up all the time because sovereignty just means the ability to determine a country's own future, who makes the country's ability to make its own laws and govern it in its own way, basically not be pushed around and bossed around by any other place. So sovereignty hasn't always laid in the terms of a whole country. Sometimes cities in the past have had their own sovereignty, like a city-state has had its own sovereignty and no larger country controls it. But where sovereignty lies, whether it be cities or countries or empires even bigger, that has changed a lot throughout time. But sovereignty just means the ability to control your own destiny as a country or a place.
Yeah, so if you asked about sovereignty, who has sovereignty of a place, you're really just being asked, like, who makes the decisions, who makes the laws, who governs that particular area, whether that's a city, a state, a country, an empire. And we're going to look at those different levels soon. So studying political geography, Cizzio and I have said before that it's quite a hard subject to teach because you have 4 weeks to do it. And it's actually, at some universities around the world, it's an entire degree. Like you could spend 3 years studying political geography, and here we're trying to condense that into 4 weeks.
Yeah.
So it's quite hard.
Yeah, and there's also, it's a weird one too because it crosses over into modern history quite a lot too. So I usually find that students who have done history as an elective in junior school in 9 and 10 and have done that little bit of European history in there somewhere, they tend to grasp it a little bit quicker. Even ancient history sometimes, because we go all the way back to the ancient Romans to talk about empires and stuff like that. So it's one of those crossovers.
School bell.
School bell.
Still here.
Still here. We're just going to keep going. Keep going. There is no school bell anymore. We just keep going. So, so to understand how different places in different times have had different governmental structures and different ways of running an area or a country or a city, it's important to know the history of different places and see how these have been implemented in the past. So it's a weird crossover. It's like a little bit of, in terms of geography, it's a lot of history chucked in there as well.
So it's really important to understand that when we're doing political geography, and this will probably put a few people at ease, we're not talking about the Labour Party and the Liberal Party, whether you should vote Democrat or Republican or what type of government. We're really looking at it from a global perspective, how countries and political areas relate to each other. And we look at the difference between diplomacy, and when that diplomacy breaks down and conversations break down, it leads to conflict. We look at movements between nation states, and we look at the change really, but like the biggest part of this topic is how the change has occurred from these large empires that ruled the world and focused mainly on expanding their territory
through conquest,
through now having these 196 UN recognized nation states that all have to work together and now come together to work on issues as a country, as a world, so things like climate change. So we also look at the United Nations as part of this topic. As I said, so much. It's a huge, very, very broad topic that can go in a lot of directions. But I think we should start off by explaining what we mean by empires and how that shift has occurred from empires to nation states.
Yes.
So we will be putting a video up for our students at Grossman, which is a map of Europe from
it's about it's about 500 BC.
500 BC, all the way through to today, and it shows the shift in empires and countries over that time. And it's not that we need you to focus on any particular one or you don't need to know them, but it's just really interesting because we often think of our maps and our world as being quite fixed, and that's definitely not the case. And if we look at it historically, there's been huge shifts in what or who owns what land, so who has sovereignty over what areas.
Yeah, exactly. So when you watch that video, it's actually really interesting to just see each either city-state, empire or country, or just sovereign territory really, because sometimes an area doesn't quite fit into any of those three major categories either. It's just constant changing of colour on the map. This place, like the Roman Empire, you'll see around 2000 years ago, really expands out to cover most of Europe, and then it sort of just shrinks and disappears again and is gone and is replaced by little bits of colour all over the place where that empire broke up. So it's important, if you watch it like every year through most of the last 2,000 years, there's been drastic changes in if you lived in a particular area, who would have sovereignty over you where you live, who would be governing you, if anybody, and all that sort of stuff. And that really happens all throughout human history, right up until about 1945, which you'll see in the video. About 1945, after World War II, a lot, not all, but a lot of the modern day European borders are basically established after World War II, and after World War II they stay relatively fixed. So when you watch that video, just pay attention to pre-1945 and post-1945 to see how much difference there is. We've actually grown up in a world that is a lot more stable. We're living in a period of history that's been a lot more stable than basically all the times that have come before us.
Let's get to a question for Cizzio.
A question for me.
I want to see if we have the same opinion on this one.
Oh,
We'll get into podcasting territory here, but
we should do a podcast.
It would be great podcast.
The Geocast. that Geocast is definitely already been taken.
So the question is, we talk about the world being more stable today, but there are parts of the world like Crimea, for example, that was recently.
Conflict, yes.
Yep. There's
2016.
Kashmir between India and Pakistan. There is Palestine, Israel. But these conflicts seem to, they flare up and you see it in the media, and then they tend to settle back down, and it's not often that one country just takes over another. Sorry, Mr. West.
Mr. West,
hi.
shout out to Mr. West.
It's much more, I would say, difficult now, or it takes much longer for a country to actually gain sovereignty over a piece of land. Why do you think that is?
So restate the question, I was just waving to Mr. West.
So today,
Yes.
it takes a lot longer for countries, or a lot of disputed zones stay disputed. So they're not actually shifted from, sovereignties and actually shifted between countries.
Oh, right.
So we see the tension in Kashmir, but it doesn't actually, we don't see these big shifts like we used to 500 years ago. What is the reason for that, do you think?
I think there's a couple of reasons. I think the United Nations is a big factor in this. So the United Nations was set up after 1945 because of all the conflict and terribleness that had happened up to that point. So essentially, in 1945, whatever borders that existed from then on were kind of established, and in the United Nations, all these countries are recognised as their own entities that can't be changed, can't be challenged, and every country has a seat at the table to be able to talk at their conflicts rather than fighting at their conflicts, because that's really the crux of political geography is how do you solve global problems and how do you ease global tensions without actually fighting through words, and so you need the United Nations to do that. I think one of the reasons that things might stay in conflict but never actually swap from control of one, like Kashmir never goes from Indian control to Pakistan control of the other.
Well, just generally, why is it so stable? Why is the world so stable?
Well,
that's another question.
Yeah, it's another question. So I think global norms is the reason that we don't see all this flipping and changing of areas. I think it's kind of accepted now for most people, most time. It's countries invading and to take a chunk of land is a thing that used to happen way back in the day, and we don't do that kind of thing anymore. That norm has existed now for about 80 years. So while countries might break up, like when the USSR broke up in 1991, that created a bunch of little, what were Russian states that now have become their own state, their own country, like Georgia, for example. But you don't see one country invading another because it's kind of not what we do anymore.
So that's what Exactly what I was hoping you were going to say,
Okay, yeah.
because it relates perfectly to your dot points. Remember, we're always looking at dot points in the syllabus, year 11, and the dot point here is the change in role of the nation state. So how has the actual role of the nation state changed? And as you said, I think there's been a big shift from once upon a time, the role of an empire or a nation state was to conquer, was to go out, find more land, find new resources, take over territory.
The only way you could have more power was to have more land.
Yeah, whereas now today, I don't think that is seen as the role of a nation state. We're not setting out, governments aren't setting out to conquer nearby territories.
Yeah.
And so when that does happen in the global community, it's not viewed favourably upon.
Yeah.
And there is resistance around the whole world.
Yeah.
Well, you're not supposed to invade other countries anymore.
Pretty much anyone who invaded any country for any reason now is automatically seen as the bad guy, no matter what other context there is. Most people consider the United States going into Iraq as an invasion that was unjustified, whether everyone believes that, it can be argued or not. But the opinion of most of the world, despite whatever intentions the United States had, everyone essentially largely agreed that they were the bad guy in that case because they went into a different country and when they weren't invited to do so, kind of thing.
Yeah.
So pretty much, it doesn't matter what the context is, the country that goes in, the aggressor, is basically always seen as the bad guy, and that norm actually protects a lot of the world, really.
And that's really different to how it was, 400 years ago. Because if we look at, or even 100 years ago, one of the reasons World War I started, and there's a lot of reasons, people always say Archduke Franz Ferdinand, but there was just a huge multitude of reasons why it started. And one of them was that there was this huge competition. So if one empire colonised new land and gained sovereignty, the other ones were looking at that and going, oh damn, they got that country, I wanted that.
Yeah.
And it was about who could get more land and who could grow a bigger empire.
Yeah.
So it was really seen as the main purpose of an empire.
Yeah.
And there was big competition over who could colonise the most land. So that's
Absolutely.
a big shift in how countries operate and how the role of the nation state has actually changed.
And you can actually see the remnants of that in the very language we're all speaking right now. But you look at the languages spoken around the world, and it is a pretty much direct reflection of the colonial history of most of the world from Europe. So Portuguese were in the 1500s, one of the earliest countries to really conquer or to really develop seafaring in a way that they could get out and start, shotgun that bit of land, or shotgun that little bit of land. Now all of Brazil speaks Portuguese because they were the first colonizers of that area. Most of Central and South America speak Spanish because the Spanish went, we got that bit. Half the world speaks English because the British then did the same. So what area speaks what language largely, except for the few bits and pieces of the world that still speak native languages, is a really strong indication of this sort of 1500 to like 1900 time period where most of Europe were just grabbing as much land as they could.
Yeah, so that's a pretty good introduction. As I said, definitely this topic, Cizzio, I could probably sit here all day and just
Easy.
keep talking.
You want us to do it? We will.
But we're not going to. We're going to give you some stuff to do at home because you're all at home.
But they like to hear us ramble about stuff.
The case study that we'd like you to look up is the case study of
Ireland. No, just Ireland.
Ireland.
She
So
says it-
the
she
case
says
study
it
of
wrong.
Ireland. Ireland's really very, very interesting case study because sovereignty in Ireland has changed a lot. And there's been very recent conflicts and terror activity in Northern Ireland as a result of sovereignty. Who owns Northern Ireland?
When I was growing up, when I was at high school, if there was on the news, if there was a act of terrorism, if a bomb had gone off in a city and hurt and killed a lot of people, I could basically guarantee that I knew when I said, where is it? It would have been either in Northern Ireland itself or in Manchester or London or somewhere in Britain because of the Irish nationalists trying to get freedom from what they saw as the United Kingdom from England. So they were conducting terrorism activities. So if you saw there had been some sort of terrorist attack on the news, you'd always say, that's probably this Northern Ireland thing again. Whereas obviously now that we don't really see that. And most people, when they think terrorism, they absolutely do not think of Irish people.
No. So I'm going to give you the coolest homework ever. There is a show on Netflix, so those people who have Netflix, and I know that's most of you, called Derry Girls, Derry. It's great. Some of my students have watched it, but I absolutely love it. And it's set in Northern Ireland during the Troubles. So the Troubles is this period of conflict that occurred where there was big disputes between the Republic of Ireland and Britain over who has sovereignty over that section of North Ireland. And it's a really interesting because
Derry Girls.
Derry Girls. My phone did not just.
That was a smash cut.
Smash cut. Derry Girls. Watch it. Great show. Set during the Troubles. Very funny, and it shows the Troubles going on in the background. So the first scene, I think they're getting ready for school, but on the TV in the background, you can see there'd just been a terror attack in Northern Ireland. So very interesting. For those students who are at Grossman, you need to complete the worksheet that I'm going to leave in classroom about Northern Ireland. There's questions there to do, there's work to submit. If you're not at Grossman, research Northern Ireland, watch Derry Girls.
Even there's a lot of really weird photos on the internet of things like you see a gunman dressed in military camo stuff with an M16 rifle hiding behind a wall, popping up to shoot and stuff like that. But like at the other side of the wall is two little girls walking to school. And there's really a weird juxtaposition of normal life going on at the same time these people are fighting. The other thing I always notice about the Troubles is that they're called the Troubles. To me, it's one of the most British things ever.
Stop causing trouble.
The decades of war and conflict and terrorism and people fighting and dying and all this terrorism and awfulness. What do we call it? Well, we're British. We call it the Troubles. We had some troubles.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's a very endearing British thing.
Yeah. If you are seeing this and you're from another school, share it with your friends, your teachers. Subscribe. Check us out on Instagram at Geography Explained Online. We're going to try and get more geography up.
Geography. If you haven't watched any geography videos yet, you're missing out on life.
Cool. And with that note, I think we should do some more social distancing.
More social elbow bumps.
Ready? See ya. Bye.